Hey, everybody, welcome to Resiliency Radio, your go-to podcast for the most cutting-edge insights in integrative and functional medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Jill, and with each episode, we dive into the heart of healing and personal transformation. Join us as we interview renowned world leaders in medicine, thought leaders, and life changers of all types and backgrounds. Today, you are in for such a treat. I've been looking forward to this interview for a very long time. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Stephanie Venn-Watson about her new book, The Longevity Nutrient. And we're going to be talking about this very cool essential fatty acid, one of the first ones developed in or discovered in over 90 years. It's called Fatty 15. And I want to be sure and just mention this. I'll introduce her in just a moment, but this is so fascinating, the study, the science, and it all has to do with a story about dolphins. So stay tuned to this episode to learn more. And I'm going to mention this now and at the end of the show, but if you want to know more about this, you can go to fatty15.com/Jill Carnahan to get a special discount. They are partnering with us to give you guys a discount if you're interested in learning more after hearing this episode. So stay tuned. Now, before I go to introducing our guest, I just want to mention if you have not yet seen the documentary, drjillmovie.com. I'm sorry, drpatientmovie.com is where you can find that. It is now streaming free on YouTube and Tubi, and it is on Amazon Prime. Listen, share it with friends. Hopefully, it'll be an encouragement for you. And then also, as you know by now, drjillhealth.com, you can find all sorts of health and beauty products. My Dr. Jill Beauty line for anti-aging, clean skincare, and all kinds of nutrients that may support you with chronic infection, illness, Lyme disease, mast cell activation disorder, and anything else you might be struggling with. So check that out at drjillhealth.com. Okay, so let me introduce Dr. Stephanie. Dr. Stephanie Venn-Watson is a veterinary epidemiologist with over 80 peer-reviewed scientific publications and 70 patients. Stephanie discovered the health benefits of C15. We're going to talk about this today while working for the U.S. Navy to continually improve the long-term health of the Navy bottlenose dolphins in San Diego. While seeking to understand why some of the dolphins were aging at a healthier and slower rate than others, she applied an advanced technology called metabolomics on archived dolphin serum to discover which molecules protected the healthiest aging dolphins. Here she discovered this C15 chain fatty acid as a healthy saturated fat. And after completing 80 key studies over 3 years, she presented this as the first essential fatty acid to be found in, like I said, 90 years. This is amazing. It's really, really fascinating to hear the story. So stay tuned as we join Stephanie. Dr. Stephanie, I am so excited to be here with you. I was telling you right before we started that I had heard about Fatty 15 and some of the research when you first came out, and I was like desperate because I thought this is so groundbreaking. And at the time, you weren't really working with physicians a whole lot. I mean, you were just starting the company, right? So I was so excited when we got to connect, and like, I really want to share your story. It's like one of those things that's maybe one of the most profound discoveries in this decade. I don't know, but it's pretty big and it's pretty interesting, and I'm fascinated by it. Let's go back to where this all started. You're a veterinary doctor and you were working with dolphins. Tell us the story about the dolphins and how you came to discover the C15.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got the dolphin card, right? So
Right.
we gotta use it. So yeah, I'm a veterinary epidemiologist and was recruited by the Navy, Dr. Jill, about 24 years ago now,
Wow.
and to help continually improve the health and welfare of older Navy dolphins. And I thought, oh, this is going to be so fun. I'm going to go to San Diego, spend a couple of years, and then go back to being a public health epidemiologist. And I ended up being there for 20 years. And the Navy, a lot of people don't know, they've taken care of a sustained population of about 100 bottlenose dolphins for over 60 years, which is amazing. They live in San Diego Bay and they go out into the open ocean every day, and every day they choose to come back. So it's really says a lot with regard to that these dolphins enjoy where they are. And because of their good care, we found, that Navy dolphins live a lot longer than dolphins in the wild. In the wild, they live to about 20 years old. At the Navy, Dr. Jill, they're now living into their 40s and 50s, and there are two dolphins this year that are turning 60 years old,
Wow, that's
which is,
amazing.
yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I was just there a couple weeks ago and got that amazing news. And so, because dolphins were living longer, over a decade of studies, we then came to understand that about 1 in 3 older dolphins developed chronic inflammation, high cholesterol, metabolic syndrome, fatty liver disease, insulin resistance, iron overload, and even the full suite of changes consistent with Alzheimer's, which we actually just published about 3 weeks ago. So we use this advanced technology called metabolomics to look at thousands of small molecules to see which ones in their serum, their archived serum, and their all fish diet predicted the healthiest aging dolphins. And that's where, we thought it would be omega-3s because all they eat are fish. And instead, it was this odd chain saturated fat, C15, was the top predictor of healthy aging dolphins. So it was a big surprise.
That's what and there's so many things I want to go into, but this was what fascinated me because I had never even heard of C15,
Me
right?
either.
And
Yeah.
then when I looked back, the cool thing is as a functional doctor, I've been testing for that on certain tests. We can talk about like how a functional medicine doctor or a patient might get that tested, but you can actually test this in the blood. So it's something that we can know as humans. But first, let's talk about dolphins and humans. So many of our human studies are mice, right? Mice are really not that much like humans, but when you describe the chronic diseases of dolphins, it sounds a lot like what we're seeing in clinical practice. So why is this a specifically really unique and great population study for the data that we've gotten for humans?
Yeah, it's a great point that you're making, which is, it initially sounds surprising to hear that dolphins and humans have so much in common, but when you think about we're large-brained, long-lived mammals, and even though we aren't evolutionarily similar, like, we didn't just branch off the tree close to each other, we have evolved in similar ways to survive, to be able to readily produce lots of glucose that our big brains need, to be able to live beyond our reproduction years. So there are these similar tools that evolution has enabled, really like in a fascinating way, right, for both dolphins and humans, which then results in we get, live long enough to be able to get the chronic aging associated diseases. While, like you were pointing out, in mice, they don't live long enough to get these diseases naturally. So you have to induce them. And so once you're inducing a disease versus letting it happen over decades, we've cured all kinds of diseases in mice that we haven't cured in people, and that's just because we're really missing that core natural pathophysiology of how we age. So dolphins provided this amazing insight, and what's great is that all this research was funded by the Office of Naval Research to help the dolphins. So, it was a great
Right.
win-win, story.
That's what's so fascinating is like and that's I love these stories of serendipity where you're on this mission to help the dolphins and you're there and it's probably a really inspiring and neat thing to do because it really is who doesn't love dolphins and just
I
the
know.
joy and like they've got a playful heart. Like I just love seeing them in the wild and seeing them, so it's kind of a neat thing because most people do have experience as a child watching them at a show or maybe going to a aquarium and seeing them and it's a really special thing or even like I've been in Mexico or other places and it's so joyful to see them. So there's this really neat connection to dolphins in that way and here you are doing your work and then out of this and how did that so you were studying what factors in their diet led to longevity. Is that how it all started and then you're trying to pinpoint which pieces made the biggest difference?
Yeah, that's right. And so we were, a lot of serendipity here, right? So
Yeah.
just the fact that we were just happened to be working with dolphins and had come from the human health realm. So it was, thinking about both. The other was that, the test, this metabolomics test had just become available in kind of like in using a readily available third independent party that could run and test, hundreds to thousands of small molecules at a relatively low cost, right? So it was a great time. And then we had this very clean data set where the Navy had the foresight of archiving serum, if you can imagine, like on patients, right? If you
Oh,
had archived serum on your patients that go
yeah,
back to when they were born, and they routinely took blood from your patients, every month,
right.
and they archived it all, and that's
Wow.
invaluable.
So
So we
yeah,
were
this
able to, yeah.
perfect data set.
Exactly. So we
Yeah.
could look for trends.
Uh-huh.
Then we could then associate with at the, if the animals had passed, we then had their tissues and we could say, gosh, they had fatty liver disease or had Alzheimer's. And that then which small molecules in their blood predicted, really we focused on what what predicted not having these conditions because we wanted to look for if we can increase levels of these healthy molecules, then can we, make a lot of progress with regard to preventing and even treating some of these aging associated conditions.
Okay, that makes so much sense. For those listening who don't know what metabolomics, maybe describe just a brief tutorial on that and why that data is important. And then I want to talk about the C chains and why, like, what does that mean with fatty acids? And then we can dive into the longevity about, nutrient.
Yeah, that sounds great. So when you go to your doctors, when people go to Dr. Jill, right, and then you get your blood drawn and they take a routine panel. And so depending upon what doctor you go to, there might be anywhere between a dozen to 3 dozen and functional.
Yeah.
You can have a lot, right?
Uh-huh.
So you can measure a lot of things, and all of these things are really chemicals within the blood. And so that it helps provide indicators with regard to your liver health and your kidney health and your immune health. So we're used to that. So what metabolomics does, it's doing that same thing, but it's blowing it up to hundreds and thousands of these chemicals, of these small molecules that we have in our blood that we can measure. So we usually focus on a handful of things, but in reality, our blood carries lots of small molecules. And now, again, because these dolphins had such a clean profile, they don't smoke, they don't drink, all they eat are fish, right? They have the same healthcare,
Yeah.
very controlled population where then it was like finding a needle in a needle stack, right? So it was just everything that we found that was significantly associated with a healthy dolphin, there was an explanation behind it. So it wasn't a lot of noise like there are in people. So that's metabolomics. It's just like a really fancy, detailed blood panel.
Okay, very good, because I want people to understand what you're doing and why this is so profound, what you discovered. And then fatty acids. Most everybody who's listening has heard of omega-3 fatty acids and maybe even omega-6 or omega-9. What is this C15 and how does this fit in? And I think it's relevant to mention it's the first discovered essential fatty acid in like 90 years.
That's
Tell us
right.
more about
So
that.
right, and that was a whole nother exciting discovery. So we talk about the fatty acids, like you said, most people have heard of fatty acids. They play a really important role, multiple roles. Fatty acids in general make up our cell membrane, and that helps determine, how our cell membrane works with signaling, with strength, resilience, flexibility. And so they play a lot of roles. We're used to, and now most people know there are different types of fatty acids, and we usually think about them as unsaturated, including polyunsaturated fatty acids and saturated fatty acids. So the polyunsaturated fatty acids, like omega-3s, omega-6s, those fit in that category, and they're called that because if we nerd out on chemistry, the chemical structure a little bit, that these are fatty acids that are connected. It's a bunch of carbons connected by bonds. And if they have a double bond between the two carbons, that automatically makes it an unsaturated fatty acid. If they have multiple double bonds, then it's a polyunsaturated fatty acids. And these are great. We need polyunsaturated fatty acids. We need our omega-3s. And think about every double bond as a hinge. So it serves as a way for the molecule to bend. And that's why it provides flexibility, is why they're oils at room temperature. These are flexible fatty acids. In contrast, saturated fats have no double bonds. So they're only single bonds, and that makes them very stable. One might say resilient.
Huh?
So there's helps, and so they go into the cell membrane and they help make it more stable. And that's where we learned that C15 as an odd chain saturated fat, so no double bonds, and has an odd number of carbons, C15, that this ended up being the Goldilocks fatty acid, saturated fat, that was had provided stability and was anti-inflammatory and had all these benefits, unlike even chain saturated fats like C14, C16, C18. Those do the opposite. They're pro-inflammatory. So it's amazing that nature can make one difference, make such a difference with just one carbon. And that's where we then tested multiple fatty acids. We did 8 studies over 3 years
Wow.
with Dr. Ed Dennis, a leader in fatty acids. He was the editor-in-chief for the Journal of Lipid Research for 15 years. So we worked with Ed, with Dr. Dennis, and we then showed, we published a paper in Scientific Reports in 2020 where we showed C15 was not only a beneficial saturated fat, but that it met this rare criteria of being the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in over 90 years, a molecule, a nutrient that we must have to maintain our baseline health, but our bodies can't make enough of, which means we have to get a certain amount from our diet.
Yeah, so that's I want to focus on that because this is so profound. And then I want to talk about because in my clinical practice, we have a lot of food allergies, we have a lot of sensitivities. So a lot of people are not eating gluten or dairy. And for me, that was also a profound insight because a lot of the source, there's many sources of C15, but a big one is butter and dairy, right? And so I
Right.
thought about, oh, no wonder this is a big deal because back when all of a sudden the fat-free 70s and 80s came along, a lot of people stopped eating full fat dairy. So maybe talk just a bit about like in humans, the sources where we might have gotten this, 50 years ago and why today we're less likely to get it.
Right. And so exactly like what you said, Dr. Jill, our primary source of C15 by far is dairy fat. And, I remember 1977, so I was 5 years old. And that's when, we moved from whole fat milk to non-fat milk and blah, right? And so,
Uh-huh.
and and that was when, Congress came out. It's just so crazy thinking about like Congress came out with
Right.
nutritional recommendations for all Americans. And it was driven for a good reason. There was a high amount of heart disease and older men dying from heart disease. And it was high, like a very high risk. So this was a very real problem. The problem is that they jumped to high LDL cholesterol causes heart attacks. And it's by eating saturated fats, and they put all saturated fats into one bucket, specifically in butter and whole dairy fat raises LDL, which then gives you heart attacks. So they didn't only recommend that for men to avoid those foods. They said for all Americans, women and children, and that stuck for, whatever reason. It's hard to get people to change their behaviors for whatever reason. Like we were like eager to be like, got it.
I
So we
remember that too, like the fat-free thing. And we were all, and of course, I was like a teenager, so fat-free yogurt and fat-free. And so, but it was like replaced with garbage. It was
it
awful.
then we had like tons of sugar. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it was like, an experiment. It's been, a 60-year experiment, and now we're a 50-year experiment. And now we're, finding that C15, because our primary source of C15 is dairy fat, population-wide C15 levels have declined. And that's where, as we explain, in the book, and it now over 100 peer-reviewed studies on C15, far beyond us, right?
Yeah.
Showing that, supporting that if we as we get lower C15 in our diet, that means less C15 in our cell membranes, that then the cells become more fragile. And as it become more fragile, it's actually causing a new form of cell death called ferroptosis, which was discovered by Columbia University researchers back in 2012. They discovered there's this whole new way that our cells were dying, and it was caused by fragile fatty acids in our cell membrane. 10,000 papers written on ferroptosis since 2012 showing it increases our accelerates our aging, increases the onset, progression, and severity of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver disease, cognitive decline. But nobody could explain where did it come from until we reported the same condition in dolphins, ironically or coincidentally in 2012, the same year that
Wow.
fructosis was discovered at Columbia University.
Yeah, this is so fascinating because in clinical practice, a couple of things. First of all, for years, and especially with mold toxicity and chronic complex illness and these environmental toxic load and autoimmunity and all the things that I see, one of the core principles is healthy cellular membranes, right? And this is
Yeah.
exactly what we're talking about. And so we've always known, okay, this exchange of lipids, the right lipids really matters. And mostly what we've known is omega-3s, but that can lead to many people I'm testing are too high in omega-3s, too low in arachidonic acid, and too low in cholesterol, because nutritionally, right? And
Yeah.
this is so counter to the standard cardiovascular kind of stuff that has been out there because patients are like, oh, my cholesterol's so low. I'm like, yeah, you're malabsorbing. Your brain's going to not function because you need
Right.
cholesterol for hormones and brain. So this idea that these saturated fats are actually healthy is a new concept for a lot of people. But those of us who've been doing this are like, of course, it makes so much
Right.
sense, right? And I
Yeah.
just have to say kudos to my dad who's in his 70s. He loves his full fat ice cream, cheese, milk. He is the only person so far I've tested that has a really robust level of C15.
I love it. This is fantastic. Yeah, it's I know, and we do find that because what happened in the 1990s, right, is that moms, all parents are told even today, like as their child turns 2, to take your child off of whole fat milk. And I hear similar stories, Dr. Jill, of parents being like, "Yeah, I didn't pay attention to those
Yeah.
recommendations. My kid got full fat milk," and
Yeah. And they're probably, if we test better than like I was low. And of course, I've been on a no dairy, no gluten diet for decades. So I was like, oh, no wonder. So for me, it was a big deal. So longevity, and this, your book, we're going to talk about this. And if anyone wants a copy, the longevity nutrient just came out. But I want to talk about what was so fascinating is there's 7 requirements for like what makes a great longevity supplement or nutrient or drug. And
yeah.
this C15 actually fits all their criteria. Do you want to start diving into that information?
Sure. And it's longevity is a really sexy word these days. And a lot of supplements, falling into those areas. And to be honest, like a lot of these supplements are tapping into various components
Yeah.
of it. So there's some grounding, right, for a lot of the supplements that are in the longevity space. We then, as we started seeing more and more support of the need for C15 really as a means to enable longevity in mammals, right? And we talk about the cell membrane pacemaker theory of aging that came from A.J. Holbert in 2005, and he showed that the longer mammalian species lifespan was dictated on the stability of fatty acids in their cell membranes. They had lower lipid peroxidation and they live longer. So it explained how a dolphin and a human live longer than a mouse. So that was kind of a first thing, like, oh, strengthened cell membranes, thanks evolution. Like, you live longer. So, in addition to that, we worked with Dr. Nicholas Shork, and he's head of NIH's Longevity Consortium. He's been doing that for 15 years. And as Nick started seeing more and more data around C15, he's like, Steph, I bet C15 is a geroprotector, and which is a molecule that helps to slow the rate at which we age biologically. And that helps to stave off and stem the chronic diseases that kill us. So he's like, and that's the holy grail of healthy aging. So worked with Nick and the 7 criteria, and I'll run through them quickly. But the first is that the molecule should tap into the human longevity regulating pathway. We know that, for example, rapamycin inhibits mTOR, metformin activates AMPK, and by doing so, it heads down the pathway that leads to longevity. We know that C15 activates AMPK and inhibits mTOR. So it's already tapping into the heart of other longevity molecules. The molecule should target specific hallmarks of aging. And so we know that C15 addresses at least 4 and then some associative evidence of addressing 6, but this includes lowering inflammaging, helping with repairing mitochondria, helping with gut dysbiosis. So there's a lot of these components again that it helps to slow aging at the cellular level, which then translates to the rest of us, to our bodies and time. The third is that there should be evidence that it slows the aging rate, and that's the tough one, right? Is to actually show that you're slowing aging rate. C15 has done that on multiple fronts. One is that it has been shown to, we know that it lowers red blood cell distribution width, or RDW. And RDW has become a very popular biomarker and well-studied biomarker of biological aging. We know that it stabilizes our red blood cells, and by doing so, it it helps to lower RDW. So you can look for that in your patients. And there was a study that was done that looked at people, a cohort of people, it's ongoing, and it showed that people at higher C15 in their lipids had a younger biological age than their chronological age.
Wow.
So good support for that. The fourth is that there should be evidence that of clinically relevant benefits within months. So this isn't about taking a pill and crossing your fingers that you live longer. You know, it's like, did I get to 100 or not? That this was a really important one for Nick. And now we have multiple studies, including 2 clinical trials, showing that by taking C15, you can raise your C15 levels, which we've known for a long time. But by doing so and getting up and over that threshold of nutritional deficiencies, of seeing improvement in liver enzymes, the gut microbiome, lower LDL cholesterol, and improved red blood cell health. And this is within 12 weeks.
Wow.
And then the last is that there should be evidence that it prevents the onset of the diseases that kill us. And that's where there's these huge, robust meta-analyses, prospective cohort studies following tens of thousands of people over a decade or more, all repeatedly showing that people with higher C15 have a lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes, heart disease, certain types of cancers like colorectal cancer and breast cancer, as well as fatty liver disease. And then the last two are kind of bonus ones, but really important. You need to be able to have access right to this intervention for 50 years or more. And the last one is that it needs to be safe for to be able to take. So that's where C15 was able to check off all of these because it's again an essential nutrient we're supposed to have, and that what every baby gets from birth. So this is really a molecule we're supposed to have, which is why it checks off all the boxes.
Hey guys, just taking a quick moment to remind you if you want to check out Fatty 15 for yourself, go to fatty15.com and /Jill Carnahan. You can get 20% off your first order. Check it out, fatty15.com /Jill Carnahan to get 20% off your first order. You don't want to miss this. I'm on this. It has been a game changer. So check it out. And while you're at it, be sure and subscribe, hit the bell to hear future episodes, and stay tuned as we bring out new episodes every week. Okay, back to our show. Right, it makes so much sense because, like I said, we've been looking at, and I test lipid peroxides in the blood of my patients almost every
Dude.
day, and that is basically this marker of oxidative stress, right? And so you're
Hmm?
saying, and when that happens, of course, just like the whole cholesterol story, I always say cholesterol is innocent, it is neutral. If you
Yeah.
have throw a hammer through your wall and you have a hole, the spackling on the like endothelium, the lining, but it just goes and tries to fix the hole. It's not bad in and of itself, but when we throw in this oxidative stress in our toxic environment or fast food diets or psychological stressors, then that oxidative stress or lipid peroxides causes inflammation to the cholesterol, which is the LDL, and then that's the problem. And again, this was the, 20, 30 years ago when we got this story that cholesterol was bad. And I love
Right.
talking about that because people sometimes are still surprised that cholesterol is not the bad guy. It's the oxidation, which you're saying C15 protects our cells and the membranes and the LDL and the red blood cells from oxidative stress, right?
That's right. I love that you test for lipid peroxidation because it is such an important measurement for your immediate health status or disease status, and then and it's relevant in the immediate state, but also for your longevity. So it's my favorite biomarker.
You know what? Honestly, me
Yeah.
too. I love that
Oh,
'cause I
that's
literally
great.
am like,
Okay,
oh,
we're
this
nerds, total
we're
nerds.
total nerds. And it's also, again, where they were looking at like cardiovascular disease, it's all about this oxidative stress. And usually, in fact, I was just looking at studies with another doctor who's doing plasma exchange and showing reduced cardiovascular disease. And all they're doing is taking out the toxins that are creating oxidative stress in the blood, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, that's helping heart disease, which you and I understand why. But for the average person, they're like, how could an oil change help the heart? And of course, it makes sense. Um, why is this so? I mean, I see the toxic load, the reasons why we're having more oxidative stresses more than ever before. This is an essential nutrient. It's not new in that sense, it's just newly discovered. But why would you say the person today needs this kind of a nutrient more than ever before from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it gets to the heart of a lot of work that you've been doing, Dr. Jill, is that, we're finding, and again, in part, it's because it's a chicken or egg thing. So as we get lower C15, some of the most fascinating work that's come out in the last year is really looking at the gut and showing that the gut lining is impaired. So we get leaky gut syndrome, right? Because if, and in part, we at least know that if you put C15 back into like a mouse model of leaky gut syndrome, then the C15 helps to basically restore that gut lining, decreasing inflammation and preventing things from going across. Regardless of what's causing it, whether it's C15 deficiency or exposure to toxins and that are then compromising that gut lining, as soon as we have a compromised epithelial barrier, whether it's our gut, our skin, that's allowing things to get in that's in our environment, right? More than ever before.
Yep.
And as those toxins are making it into our system and in our blood, it becomes a lot harder to be able to fight off what's happening. So C15, now more than ever before, because of the exposure to toxins with, our leaky barriers, it's helping to protect each and every cell against the toxins that are, making them in with regard to lipid peroxidation. But it's also increasingly, we're understanding, playing a role at stopping
Yeah.
those toxins from being able to be absorbed in the first place. So much exciting work. And this is, all done by different teams. It's been the most rewarding seeing other people around the world working on it. We had 3 groups just this last year retest challenge our definition of C15 as an essential fatty acid. And they all came back from France, Canada, and China, did their own gold standard studies and said, yeah, no, it meets the criteria of essential fatty acids. So
Wow.
thrilled that this is getting out.
I would agree. And again, I started the show just talking about like this might be the biggest discovery of the decade. I mean, really, this is a big deal if you're out there listening, like, okay, Dr. Jill, one more thing. This is a really big deal. And I see it happening. And what you just described in functional realm, when I'm teaching on the gut, we're talking about leaky gut, leaky brain, leaky mitochondria. And what you're saying is this molecule helps to stabilize all the leakiness that is happening from inflammation, toxic load. And I always frame it as toxic load, infectious burden, and these two come together to create immune dysfunction, inflammation, and at the core, often it's those two players driving immune dysfunction and inflammation, and then driving leaky membranes of the cells, which is all the talk of leaky gut, leaky brain, leaky mitochondria,
Right.
name it, leaky skin. And so this is a molecule that can stabilize that leakiness to prevent the translocation of molecules that could harm our bodies in the blood and create oxidative stress, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's you're spot on. And what's, important is that, a lot of this we saw again is because we're seeing it in people. We and others have been able to prove it out in the lab. But also it gets back to like we were seeing it in the dolphins. I mean, the dolphins, they were getting their C15 from specific types of fish. So obviously they don't eat ice cream,
Uh-huh.
but they were getting their C15 from the skin and the heads of specific types of fish. And at the same time, we were moving away from whole fat dairy that they were getting initially we're getting a really fatty fish called eulicon, but that fishery died. And so the Navy dolphins started getting low fat, basically low C15 fish. At the same time, we were moving to low fat milk. And so again, serendipity in the way that this experiment was happening at the same time in 2 different populations, and we saw the same diseases pop up and importantly, able to, nutritional deficiencies are fixable. We've been able to do that with the dolphins. And so now being able to move over and, do what we can in many ways. Like, let's look at agricultural practices. Let's look at what recommendations kids are getting. And then the development of a pure bioavailable vegan friendly supplement came from a request by the Navy. The Navy said, hey, staff and team, and Eric, my Navy physician husband, can you develop a pure C15 ingredient so that we can get around all the limitations that come from food? But the supplement is really meant to be a supplement, which it's supplementing the needs, but it's not the cure-all, right? It's about what we need to do as, population wide throughout the world in the food supply to help fix this problem.
The shift. Well, let's talk about that a little because there are some foods we can eat and get this. So let's talk about the foods and kind of the top sources, and then let's talk about how did you develop the Fatty 15 supplement? Where is it from? And like doses and kinds of things like that.
Yeah, so the primary source again from C15 is dairy fat. It was actually C15 has been used for decades as a biomarker of how much dairy fat people eat. So
Oh,
that's how
there's my dad. Like,
that's your dad. And so um, the average person today has about 0.2% of C15 of total fatty acids in their blood. Even more reliable is the concentration, but a lot of tests don't include that. But that would be like 5 micrograms per
okay.
mil for most tests.
Mhm.
But if you go by that 0.2%, most of the world today is at that level. That's just because it's in the middle doesn't mean
Right.
that it's healthy. So we've learned you're right on the kind of the edge of C15 deficiency syndrome, of cellular fragility syndrome with that point too. So when we go to Sardinia, right, the high longevity zone in Sardinia, where both men and women are increasingly living more likely to live to 100, they have C15 levels that are 2 to 3 times higher than the rest of the world.
Wow.
And they don't have supplements. They don't have fatty 15 there. So they get there. They are able to achieve those levels by through they have goats and sheep that are local herds. They live in a mountainous region and they feed on that mountainous grass. When we look at the studies from different areas, we know that that cows, sheep, and goats fed grass have twice as much C15 in their milk fat than if they were fed corn or grain. And if a ruminant is fed a high altitude grass, their C15 is even higher. So in Sardinia, they've replaced a lot of meat with cheese. So they routinely eat cheese from the perfect combination of local grass-fed mountainous
Amazing.
um, animals. So that's how they're getting there. So it's possible.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's so, yeah,
longevity levels.
fascinating. And there's a few minor sources as well, right? But so mostly dairy fat, and again, good quality. That's also part of the problem is it's hard to get organic, really clean, good, hormone-free dairy.
Yeah, and you're making a good point that not only, is grass-fed what you want to choose from a dairy source, but there was a study showing that women who chose organic foods had higher C15 levels than those who didn't. They couldn't explain why, but again, it's talking about high quality
Yeah.
foods. We can get some from fish. Salmon has some C15 in it. And if we eat fiber, fiber feeds microbes in our gut that then can use inulin and fiber to help make some C15
Oh,
levels. Not
wow.
enough.
So our
Yeah.
microbiome can produce a small amount of it.
Yeah. So
Okay.
not enough to get
Yeah.
us up and
Yeah.
over, but I mean, we'll take everything we can get.
Right.
So,
Right.
and yet another reason, I know there's a lot of discussions around fiber these days, but boy, I mean, fiber, it's for me, it's yet another reason of how fiber can be useful is helps with C15 production. So fiber, high quality dairy, specifically from grass fed. I don't think we can choose mountainous
Yeah.
grass-fed animals. And then for people who, and then to then get above and beyond, that was then the reason for the supplement development.
Okay, well, that makes sense too, because the short chain fatty acids, which are produced by our microbiome, are so crucial to inflammation, and butyric acid is one, which is primary source is butter. And I wonder how that's so our microbiome, by feeding on fiber, can produce C15, kind of like
Yeah.
it produces short chain fatty acids.
Yeah,
That's
it's pretty,
very cool.
pretty, pretty
Pretty
neat.
amazing. Yeah, very cool. But again, we probably need. So then you developed Fatty 15, and where's that source from? How did you develop that, and what kind of dose would people want to start on if they're deficient?
Right. So we said, so the challenge from the Navy was, can you develop a C15 supplement that's better than what we can get from food?
Okay.
So that was the challenge, and which we accepted. So in order to do that, we said we're going to make basically a pharma grade, so a pure C15 molecule that is vegan friendly, so we can get away from allergies and animal-based products. So we basically simply we take C14, which is readily available in plants, and it's in a pure C15 form, C14 form. We add a carbon, and
Okay.
so it's exactly the same, except for like in food, C15 is attached to triacylglycerides, which we can absorb. So
Uh-huh.
we have to use digestive enzymes to pluck it off and then absorb it.
Got it.
This is like, oh, well, we can just make the free fatty acid form, and that's pure and bioavailable, 100% bioavailable. And so that was, and then without having to compete with, if we look at milk fat, 1% is C15. Over 40% of fatty acids in milk fat are these pro-inflammatory
Mhm.
fats. So when they compete with each other, studies have shown, at least in mice, that if they eat a high-fat diet, they actually have lower C15
Oh,
levels because
wow.
it's just like the
Yeah.
little C15 can't compete with the kind of the
Yeah.
bully fatty acids in there. So we said, okay, Navy, we're going to have it by itself, no bullies, bioavailable. And it's the exact same molecule that's used in all these studies I've talked about. It's the exact same molecule. So that helps it work. And so people have been really, really happy with the supplement.
Yeah, I'm on it. I mean, I just don't mind saying that because like I said, so testing. I use Genova Nutraval and Genova Omega Profile. It does do this. Do commercial labs have? I know there's like an Omega check with Quest Labs, but I don't recall if I've seen C15 on there. What are commercially available options if people want to check their labs?
Yeah, you hit on the one that's readily available. There's even for, and again, we actually recommend people go to their doctors, like you, Dr. Jill, and go get your NutrAval panel from Genova. We also have worked with Genova for an at-home blood spot test for people who don't have access to wonderful functional docs like yourself. But it's better to go get your blood taken with a doc physician and get your test done that way. Um, there are increasingly C15s being included in fatty acid panels, but you have to ask your doctor to make sure that C15 is in there. Another piece of serendipity and luck was that had we done this study in dolphins 3 years earlier, the first study we did was just with fatty acids before we did the metabolomics work. And because again, we thought it was going to be omega 3s, would be predictive. Had we done that study 3 years earlier, that panel would not have included C15 on it, and we would have never made this discovery. So that means we're still getting there. So ask your doctor, make sure they have C15
Okay,
on the
I
panel.
love that because that's what I'm pretty sure the commercially available one does not. And I'm always like,
I
oh,
don't think
come
it does.
on,
I don't
right? And
think
I'm like,
Quest has it. We need to put some pressure, right? Some
we
commercial
totally do.
pressure on them.
I'm going to be making some calls. I love that. And then, like you said, I just started ordering if you don't want the full. So the NutrAval includes metals and all kinds of nutrient stuff. It's a great panel. I really like it. But
Mhm.
there is a smaller version that's just the omegas. And I suppose now it's at home or patients can do it like a blood spot, right? I think it's
That's right.
okay.
Yeah.
And if you're listening, we'll include links to all the stuff we talk about here, so you can check the show notes for that link or whatever. So obviously you guys just published this book. You published this amazing book. I read it over the weekend. Really, really good
Amazing.
read when you want to know all the, and like I said, I loved the fact that this really checks all the boxes because as I had been reading and then starting to look at it, it was really interesting, but it really is a game changer. Um, you had this amazing story, and I just love that too. But if you go back to your younger self and like, how amazing is this, your life and what you've like happened upon? And what would you tell your younger self back in the day? Did you have any idea of all that would happen in this last
Oh.
couple decades? For
No, and I think like a lot of people know if if they've heard me talk before. Like Dr. Jill, I don't even know how to swim, so I would not never ever have predicted that I would be working with dolphins at the
yeah.
Navy, let alone the Discovery. And so I do hope, like with regard to the longevity, we talk about longevity, from a medical perspective, and we also talk about like the why, like why do we want to live longer? And it's, we want to be healthy as long as possible so we could have more time to do the things we love doing, and to have a purpose, right? And to fulfill it. And so I think with my story, I hope that it's an inspiration to others that sometimes that purpose lands in your lap, right? And you need to follow life where it takes you and take those opportunities. Like for me, I thought I was just going to go to San Diego for a couple of years and play with dolphins. And it's life is funny in which it shows you whole new avenues, and when you go chase them, pursue them, and you find something worth fighting for,
Yeah.
uh, please do so because it definitely has given me lots of purpose, and so grateful for the Navy and the Dolphins.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I couldn't wait to talk to you and have you on the show because I sense in the book and who you are, what I've read about you, we haven't met in person, but Your energy is so genuine and authentic, and I really love that because even for me, if I share something, I hope it always comes from a place of like, I really believe in this. It is like what drives me to get up every morning and help patients in that. And I see that in you too. And I just
Oh,
thank you for bringing that generosity and openness because often it does start with the curiosity and you go in and this thing happens, but it takes a special person to be in that place in that time and follow it. And I'm sure this has not always been easy. So, I mean, this
yeah.
the amount of work that's gone into this is profound. So thank you for being that person that
Oh.
has followed it the whole way and brought, I mean, it really is a game changer.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dr. Jill. And we're so appreciative. It's one thing, to be able to work with dolphins, make the discovery and get the science out, but then really where it translates, it's where it's with you, and so it's when you work with physicians are working with their patients and we can actually put it to work and have it mean something. And so thank you for all of the work you're doing as C15 takes on this next exciting phase.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted to support you. And if you want to get a copy of the book or want to find more about it, of course, we'll have links below and I'll have a discount for you. But where can people find more about you, the story, Fatty 15?
Yeah, so the book available wherever books are sold, and so which is great. And then with for me, find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, healthcare professionals. I'm there, and then Fatty 15, obviously at fatty15.com, but work through Dr. Jill. We really encourage, like you said, you'll have a link there. And then for healthcare providers, as you know, we have a great healthcare provider program. And so you can find that through fatty15.com, the clinic on the clinics page. So real excited. We have a growing community. The movement is on. And we're ready, like I say at the end of the TED Talk in the book, save the dolphins, save the world.
I love it. Oh gosh. Well, thank you again for your heart, your purpose and meaning, and just for bringing this to the world. You're a beautiful human, and it's delightful to get to know you better.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Jill. This has been such a joy.
You're welcome. Hey guys, just taking a quick moment to remind you if you want to check out Fatty 15 for yourself, go to fatty15.com and /Jill Carnahan. You can get 20% off your first order. Check it out, fatty15.com /Jill Carnahan to get 20% off your first order. You don't want to miss this. I'm on this. It has been a game changer. Hey guys, as you can tell, I love the science behind Fatty 15. I've such a believer when I first heard about it, heard the story, and really realized the power it has to affect all of my patients who are experiencing aging and want to experience more longevity. It's really been a game changer. And as I already mentioned, if you haven't got the book, check out the longevity nutrient. You can read all about it here. And find that more information on fatty15.com. If you guys want the discount I mentioned, special for our listeners, go to fatty15.com /Jill Carnahan, get 20% off your first order. Fatty 15, I am on this. It's a game changer. Check it out. Thanks again for joining us today for another episode of Resiliency Radio. As you know, you can find transcripts and past episodes at jillcarnahan.com. You can listen on any place you listen to podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, etc. If you do, please leave us a review there if you like these episodes. And if you're listening on YouTube, if you haven't yet subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified of future episodes. And I will see you again next week for another episode of Resiliency Radio.